December 19, 1997. Westwood Village, Los Angeles, 6:43 p.m. Flashbulbs detonate in white bursts across the red carpet. Security lines bend under the weight of screaming fans. Teenagers are pressed against barricades, crying not because they've met him but because he exists. Inside the Mann Village Theater, Leonardo DiCaprio adjusts his cufflinks in the dim hallway behind the curtain. The muffled roar outside vibrates through the walls. It sounds less like applause and more like weather, a storm with his name in it. He is 23 years old. Just weeks earlier, Titanic had been tracking as a big film. Now it is something else. The studio didn't just release a movie, they released a phenomenon. And at the center of it, a face that would be printed on magazine covers, locker posters, and bedroom walls across continents. You can almost feel the temperature shift in that moment, not heat, pressure. The lights dim, the crowd swells, and in that instant something irreversible happens. Leonardo DiCaprio becomes the most recognizable young actor in the world. But what no one sees, not the cameras, not the executives, not the fans outside clutching handmade signs, is the calculation beginning quietly behind his eyes. Because in Hollywood, a moment like this is not just a triumph. It's a trap. Within weeks, offers flood in, romantic leads, action-adventure franchises, big-budget epics designed to turn him into a permanent box office monarch. Studios are not subtle, they want another Jack Dawson. They want wind in the hair, they want charm, they want global hysteria replicated on command. This is the system at work. When Hollywood senses momentum, it accelerates, it multiplies, it extracts. Agents talk in numbers, back-end points, multi-picture deals, guaranteed marketing pushes. Executives talk about timing. Strike while the iron's hot. Don't disappear. Visibility equals dominance. And for most actors at 23, this would be the dream. But fame at that altitude has a strange side effect. It distorts identity. Interviews become repetitive. Questions blur together. You're no longer being asked about craft, you're being asked about how it feels to be adored, about screaming fans, about the heartthrob label. A word that starts to stick. Heartthrob. It sounds harmless, flattering even. But in Hollywood vocabulary, it's a category, and categories are cages. Behind closed doors, there's growing anxiety, not about money, not about success, but about permanence. What happens if the industry only sees the surface? What happens if the box office high becomes the ceiling? Because there is a historical pattern here. Young actors who peak too brightly often burn out just as fast. They become frozen in a single image, romantic lead, poster icon, teenage obsession. Then the audience ages out and so does the relevance. Leonardo had already lived parts of this cycle before Titanic. As a child actor, he'd fought to be taken seriously. He had chosen what's eating Gilbert Grape when safer options were available. He'd pursued roles that hurt a little, roles that required something deeper. Now suddenly, depth is not what the machine wants. The machine wants replication. There's a meeting, one of many, where a major studio presents a project positioned as the natural successor to Titanic. Sweeping romance, massive scale, a global release strategy designed to own the decade. It would guarantee continued hysteria, magazine dominance, the crown secured. The safe move. And this is where the quiet shift begins. Because instead of leaning forward, instead of capitalizing, he hesitates. Hesitation in Hollywood is dangerous. Momentum is currency, and pausing feels like burning it. But hesitation can also be awareness. You can imagine the conversation in private, not dramatic, not explosive, just measured. What if repeating this narrows the future? What if the applause today limits the choices tomorrow? There is a psychological cost to being too visible, too fast. The more the audience believes they know you, the harder it is to surprise them, and surprise is power. So instead of signing the expected deal, he steps sideways. Not publicly, not with a press release. Just quietly declines. And that decision, almost invisible in the headlines, sends a subtle signal through the industry. He will not be rushed. He will not be multiplied. And suddenly the machine has to recalibrate. But stepping away from guaranteed dominance creates a different kind of risk. Because in Hollywood, absence can either build mystique. or erase you entirely. And for the first time since the ship sailed into theaters, Leonardo DiCaprio makes a move that could either elevate him into something enduring or quietly end the peak before it even settles. The industry watches. So does the clock. Los Angeles, spring 1998. An office overlooking Century City. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished glass table. A development executive slides a bound script across the surface like an offering. "It's built around you," he says. That phrase, "built around you," is supposed to feel powerful. In Hollywood, it means leverage. It means the machine has adjusted its gears to match your silhouette. The project is engineered for scale, a sweeping period romance with action elements, overseas markets already pre-sold, soundtrack placements mapped out, a marketing plan that includes international tour before the script is even locked. This isn't art, it's trajectory. And trajectory is seductive. You can almost hear the numbers clicking in the background: projected global gross, merchandise tie-ins, award season positioning. At 23, he could become something unprecedented, a permanent box office monarchy, a franchise before franchises dominated the industry. But there's something else in the room. Fatigue. Not physical exhaustion, something quieter, psychological saturation. For months, every public appearance has triggered hysteria, every interview circles the same orbit, every photographer wants the same expression. Jack Dawson over and over. He flips through the script, beautifully formatted, predictable arcs, emotional beats designed to recreate the last eruption. It's safe. And that's the problem. Because safety at this level is actually repetition. There's a private realization forming, one that most actors never articulate until it's too late. If you let the industry define your value at your most commercially explosive moment, that definition can fossilize. Typecasting doesn't happen overnight, it happens through momentum. One romantic epic becomes two become three. Suddenly the audience expects a version of you that doesn't evolve. And evolution is survival. So instead of signing, he delays. Instead of announcing a slate of massive follow-ups, he slows down. And Hollywood does not know what to do with slowing down. Executives start whispering about cooling heat. Agents caution against disappearing too long. The fear isn't just about box office, it's about narrative. The industry writes stories about actors quickly. If you're not visible, they invent explanations. But this isn't disappearance. It's filtration. Behind the scenes, a different list begins to form. Scripts that are smaller, riskier, morally ambiguous, stories that aren't built for hysteria but for credibility. This is where psychology overtakes momentum. Because stepping away from guaranteed global dominance requires confronting a brutal question. What if the audience moves on? Hollywood attention is volatile. The same crowd that screams can pivot in a year. New faces emerge, new obsessions. If you don't capitalize immediately, you might never regain that altitude. It's a gamble against time. And time in Hollywood is ruthless. But there's another layer here: control. At peak fame, you are everywhere, but paradoxically, you have less control than you think. Studios push schedules, publicists schedule appearances, your image becomes a shared asset. By refusing the expected blockbuster cycle, he's not just changing projects. He's reclaiming authorship. Then comes the pivot that confuses people. Instead of another romantic spectacle, he signs Onto the Beach 2000, a darker, morally fractured story about idealism collapsing into paranoia. The tone is restless. The protagonist is not purely charming, the world is not safe. It's not designed for mass hysteria. Critics will later debate the film. Some praise its ambition, others question its execution, but that isn't the point. The point is psychological repositioning. He is telling the industry, "I am not your souvenir." And then an even more defining shift. A meeting with Martin Scorsese. Not flashy, not tabloid fuel, just two people discussing character depth, moral complexity, obsession. Scorsese doesn't need a heartthrob, he needs intensity. That collaboration, beginning with Gangs of New York, doesn't just change roles, it changes perception. From that moment forward, the conversation shifts from teen idol to serious actor. But here what makes this pivot extraordinary. It only works because of the earlier refusal. Had he stacked 3 consecutive romantic blockbusters, the Scorsese partnership might have felt like rebranding, desperate, strategic. Instead, it feels deliberate. Because absence built anticipation. The industry recalibrates around those who are not constantly available. Scarcity creates leverage, and leverage creates longevity. You can see the pattern forming. Fewer projects, longer gaps, increasingly complex characters, psychological heaviness over charm, moral ambiguity over innocence. He is aging on screen intentionally. But risk never disappears. Each unconventional role carries financial uncertainty. Each pause between films invites speculation. Is he losing heat? Is he overthinking? Is he wasting momentum? The gamble continues. And in Hollywood, gambles don't reveal their outcomes immediately. They reveal them years later. Because what he is really doing isn't just avoiding typecasting. He's constructing distance. And distance in a fame-driven industry is power. But power built on absence is fragile. And the next phase of this strategy will test whether restraint can truly outperform saturation. Or whether the machine eventually punishes those who resist it. New York City, winter 2001. A production office near Tribeca, no red carpet, no screaming barricades, just fluorescent lights and a script covered in notes. The hysteria has cooled. Not vanished, cooled. There are no daily tabloid frenzies now, no teenage stampedes shutting down city blocks. The industry has moved on to newer obsessions, fresh faces, younger sensations. The machine always refreshes. And this is the moment most actors fear. Because when the noise fades, you're left alone with the choice you made. He could have ridden the wave, instead he let it crest and fall. That kind of restraint isn't glamorous, it's quiet. It feels at times like stepping off a moving train and hopping its circles back. But something subtle is happening beneath the surface. Meetings begin to change tone. Instead of being pitched as a face for spectacle, he's being approached as a collaborator. Scripts arriving are morally heavier. Characters are layered with flaws, obsession, guilt, ambition. The conversations are no longer about maintaining hysteria, they're about building range. This is the invisible dividend of restraint. When you're not everywhere, people look at you differently. And yet psychologically, this period is precarious. Because slowing down doesn't eliminate pressure, it transforms it. There's no longer the suffocating demand to stay omnipresent. Instead, there's the quieter anxiety of relevance, of timing, of wondering whether the audience that once screamed will still show up not for a fantasy but for complexity. You can almost imagine the internal recalibration. Less smiling for magazine covers, more script analysis. Less brand maintenance, more character excavation. This is where the collaboration with Martin Scorsese deepens. On the set of Gangs of New York, the environment is radically different from the polished chaos of Titanic. The performances are raw, the tone is operatic but violent. Daniel Day-Lewis dominates scenes with frightening intensity. This is not a comfort zone. It's confrontation. And that's intentional. Working alongside someone like Day-Lewis forces recalibration. There's no leaning on charm, no relying on familiarity. Every scene becomes a proving ground. That choice sends another quiet signal through Hollywood. He isn't protecting his image, he's challenging it. And then comes The Aviator, Howard Hughes, obsessive, brilliant, unraveling, a role that requires precision, vulnerability, deterioration. It's the opposite of the untouchable heartthrob. It's isolation on screen. This is where the psychological strategy crystallizes. Instead of maintaining youth as a brand, he begins portraying men collapsing under ambition, men haunted by power, men wrestling with internal fractures. It's not accidental. By selecting characters consumed by obsession, he distances himself further from the simplistic idol narrative. He becomes associated with intensity, with risk, with artistic seriousness. And something else happens. Awards conversations begin. Not as hype as credibility. This is the shift that most viewers don't consciously register. They don't see the meetings declined, the scripts rejected, the calculated pauses. They just feel the transformation. From poster icon to performer, But here's the twist. Restraint doesn't just change perception, it alters leverage. Studios begin waiting. Directors adapt schedules around availability, projects stall to secure him. Scarcity has created demand, but this time not for replication. For gravity. And gravity ages well. The industry recalibrates around those who cannot be rushed. Yet the risk remains ever present. Every gap between films stretches longer, 2 years, 3 years. In a culture addicted to constant visibility, absence can be misread as decline. But absence, when deliberate, becomes myth. You can feel it building. He's no longer everywhere, which makes each appearance an event. And that's the paradox Hollywood rarely acknowledges. The more you withdraw strategically, the more control you gain over the narrative. But control always comes with a question. How far can you pull back before the audience forgets the original spark? And as the 2000s unfold, the gamble reaches its most delicate phase. Because now, the goal is no longer survival after Titanic. It's permanence. Los Angeles, February 22, 2015. Backstage at the Dolby Theater, the air smells like cologne, velvet, and adrenaline. He adjusts his tuxedo sleeve again, a small, unconscious movement. Cameras are everywhere, producers whisper timing cues, the envelope hasn't been opened yet. Years have passed since Titanic, nearly 2 decades. And the narrative has shifted completely. No one is talking about teen hysteria now, no one is asking about heartthrob status. The conversation has become something else entirely: endurance, craft, commitment. But what's remarkable isn't just that he's standing here again. It's how he got here. Between 1997 and this stage, there were long gaps, strategic silences, fewer films than his peers, each project heavier than the last. Blood Diamond, Shutter Island, Inception, The Wolf of Wall Street. Notice the pattern. None of them are designed to preserve innocence. None of them protect likability. All of them demand intensity. This is the psychological pivot fully realized. Instead of allowing fame to freeze him at 23, he aged his image aggressively. He embraced characters that were morally compromised, obsessive, unstable, ambitious to the point of destruction. It's a subtle but profound act of self-preservation. Because Hollywood doesn't just reward visibility, it rewards reinvention. And reinvention requires distance from your most profitable identity. That's the part few people understand. The industry pushes for repetition because repetition feels safe, but long-term power comes from unpredictability. If the audience can't anticipate your next move, they remain curious. Curiosity sustains longevity. There's another layer to this strategy, one less discussed. By refusing constant output, he avoided oversaturation. In the 2000s and 2010s, social media began reshaping celebrity culture. Visibility became relentless, access became constant, stars who were once mythic became daily content. He resisted that too. Few interviews, minimal public oversharing, limited personal exposure, appear when the work appears, then disappear. It's not accidental. It's discipline. Because in a system that monetizes personality, withholding personality preserves mystique. And mystique is rare currency in modern Hollywood. Backstage in 2015, as the ceremony unfolds, you can sense something larger than an award nomination. This isn't about a single performance. It's about a trajectory that refused the obvious path. Had he stacked romantic blockbusters in the late 90s, the arc might have flattened. He might have become nostalgic, a symbol of a decade rather than a participant in multiple ones. Instead, the restraint created elasticity. He evolved as the industry evolved. But restraint also demands psychological endurance. There were years without nominations, years of almost, public jokes about the elusive Oscar, internet memes, headlines framing him as perpetually overlooked. That could have pressured him into chasing safer prestige roles, into accelerating output, into proving something prematurely. He didn't. He waited. Because the strategy was never about winning quickly. It was about lasting long enough for the right moment. And when the envelope finally opens, when his name is called, the applause feels different from 1997. not explosive hysteria. Wait. Respect. The room stands not for a sensation, but for a body of work. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because at 23 in an office overlooking Century City, he chose not to replicate the peak. He chose friction over familiarity. But here's the deeper industry truth. When a major star steps back intentionally, Hollywood adapts around them. Directors craft projects with patience, studios accept delays, campaign strategies stretch over years, the power dynamic shifts subtly away from immediacy toward negotiation. Absence becomes leverage. And that recalibration doesn't just benefit one actor. It influences how future stars manage their visibility. Because once someone proves that slowing down can increase control, others notice. The machine still runs fast. But now there's proof you don't have to run with it. And that may be the most lasting legacy of that early refusal. Not just a career saved from typecasting, but a demonstration that in Hollywood, dominance doesn't always come from being everywhere. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly when not to be.